Whoa, Nelly. Is this thing on? Because I can't tell. I don't know what's happening. But, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
All right. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of American Hit Radio, WHPC 90.3. I'm your host, Tom Ryan, my lovely wife, co-host, Heidi Morales Ryan, here as well to bring you a full hour of music. Now, Wednesdays, of course, we're normally talking about one of two things. One of the 500 albums that we picked for the top 500 of the top 40, or one of the 500 albums that we picked for the alternative top 40. Well, right now we're on a bit of a run for the top 500 of the top 40 because we played, we did two shows on Jimi Hendrix' Electric Ladyland, and then we just did a show last week on the Traffic's second album, and now we are back with another two-parter. December of 1968, an album that went to number one, stayed there for quite a while. Might you guess what that is? It's easy for me because I can remember Christmas of 1968 quite well. And the first time I had ever seen the Beatles' White Album, as it is now called. I mean, I know that we've all had 5 decades to consider what I'm about to say. But isn't it unbelievably amazing to consider the stylistic changes that took place in the 5 short years from January 1964 to December 1968? Has there ever been a period in music history where the changes were so drastic in such a short amount of time? From a Paul McCartney perspective, compare, let's say, Till There Was You with Why Don't We Do It in the Road? Or from John Lennon's point of view, how about There's a Place compared to Happiness is a Warm Gun? These are songs that are written and performed by the same human beings only 5 years apart, but the latter songs eclipse the stylistic relevance of the earlier compositions.
Unbelievable.
Not the historical relevance. I don't mean to say that, because the historical importance of what was happening on the early Beatles albums will never fade away. But the Beatles essentially grew up before our eyes, and the world grew up with them. The entire world felt significantly less innocent in 1968 than it did in 1964, and no album better captures that restless sense of unease more than the Beatles' double album, which was simply called The Beatles. A plain white cover with nothing on it but just like an embossed name that said The Beatles. Later copies would actually not even be embossed. It would just be a slightly gray readable thing that said The Beatles. Either way, it's the White Album. This show is going to feature music from the first 2 sides of that record. We're going to get both side 1 and side 2 in their entirety in the course of the show. And since a lot of the song is, the 2 sides have got 17 tracks. It's a lot of music that the Beatles squeezed onto this album, mostly because they weren't getting along and they weren't basically working together. But they put in more time individually and put down so much, and they crammed it all together. That's what makes this album so incredibly fascinating. No singles, not a single hit single on the entire record. And yet it never gets boring. It's always fascinating and weird. So we're going to play songs in pairs or maybe 3 at a time as we go through it so we can get in as much as possible. So kicking off side 1, I think you know the opening track, pretty obvious. It's one of Paul's. It's him on drums, actually, back in the USSR.